So let's continue with our class topic. So why English deserves a global level as a common language? The first question is it because of the power of its speakers? So this is an interesting quote because English is more romance than a Germanic language. So I would say this has something to do with the English as a history because English is a result of a relationship with other people and with other culture and with the other languages. Actually, looking back on its history, that we can see that there is a constant contact of English people with other cultures. So they could be sometimes visitors, and sometimes they could be conquerors, and sometimes they could be colonists here. Let's take an example. Who was the first conquest? Who was the first conqueror in history of the British history? He was Roman Emperor Claudius. The Roman Claudius, he's the son of Emperor Augustus. Then he landed in British Island in 50 AD. So you can see it's amazing at that time that he brought with him 40,000 Roman soldiers. It's unbelievably big enough. So anyway, he was a huge military power, so you can guess that he immediately seized the control of these British people. So who were living there? The first inhabitant was Celtic. The Celtic people, they soon was conquered. So they were the conqueror. Then you may be curious, so what is the relationship between the Celtic people and the Roman conqueror? They usually maintain a very peaceful coexistence. So you can see that what's the impact of their language. Of course, the Roman people, they rulers, and they were church people, and they were education. The Latin, he brought with them, the Latin language. So Latin was the language for the upper class at the British society. So let's move on to another. But however, that the Roman soldiers, they had to leave. They had to leave the British Island because they were not forced to leave, but they had to. Why? Because the Roman country at the home, they were in trouble. So the Roman soldiers, Roman conquerors in British Island, they left Britain and they came back to their homeland in Rome to defend their country. So what's the result? The Celtic people, they had trouble after Roman emperor left the British Island. Why? Because there is many savage tribes, they began to attack the Celtic people. So sometimes they needed some helper. So the Celtic people, they invited some other European people. Then they invited, could you please help us? And they were Anglo-Saxon people. So they came as a helper, but ironically, they became later conqueror. So it was a very slow process of slow and long and step-by-step process of Anglo-Saxon people who began to control the British Island. Then this is a very vital time for English because that was the time the Old English was born. It was 500 AD. So you can see there are three tribes here. So there is Anglo, and there is Saxon and Jute. They came over to the British Island over the different time and over a time, different time zones. Then there was a very slow movement into the British Island. So the Roman, let me repeat again, the Roman legion left. As a result, the door opened to northern Germanic tribes to come in. So that's when the Old English was born. Actually, the Old English is the fusion. It's a combination of the dialects of these three Anglo-Saxon tribes. So at first, that when they arrived, Anglo and the Saxon and Jute people arrived at British Island, they couldn't communicate to one another because there they were speaking different dialects. So, but as they are living together and communicating with one another, they were emerging a fusion, a combined version of language that is seen as the start of Old English. So they say that English is a Romance and English, then there came the Danish invasion. It started about a century and it lasted for 200 years. So Danish invasion, Danish means the Scandinavian people, and the Scandinavian people, they are Viking people, and they are very aggressive and very warfaring and seafaring people. And also they left their language is said to be Old Norse. The Old Norse is a language that was spoken by the Viking people. So there is Old Norse trace left in English. For example, the skin is the Scandinavian word. So on the other hand, in Anglo-Saxon language is hide. So hide is Anglo-Saxon language. Meanwhile, the skin is Old Norse language, and also skull. And these are the Old Norse example traces left in English: skull, skill, and the skarta. Skarta now changed into the skirt, and the sick versus ill. And they from Old Norse, and his sins and his things. And also this is a Scandinavian words, English from the Scandinavian words: derby, rugby, bank, birth, ball, dirt, down, egg, crawl, die, gape, get, give, left, race, scarce, take, thrive. This came from the Scandinavian word. So it's amazing to see that the very frequently used English words like get, give, left, race, this came from Old Norse. It's very notable. So let's continue. English is romance. English is a relationship with other people. After that, there is a Norman conquest in 1066. So Norman, they are the people who are living in the Northern Europe, maybe currently France, and they arrived. So the Roman people, the French people, they conquered. The William, he brought with him about 5,000 or 100,000 soldiers with him, and he conquered France. As we already talked about the Norman French, then the French people, so as a conqueror, the French language has become the language of the schools and the rulers and upper class. So if you are speaking English, they would regard you as the high class people. And if you are speaking English, they would regard you as the low class people. So this is a period where the English was regarded as a language for the grassroots language, and the French was the language for the nobility. But it took 200 years that the reversal of face of two languages. So English became the mainstream language. Meanwhile, the French declined and died out and declined it. So we already talked about that. We will be talking about when we are talking the global trade of English and local trade of English. So these are the English words from Norman French about law of court. As you know, at the time, the French language used to be the language of court and law and the high officials and the government. And therefore, these are the French words that left in English. For example, justice, perjury, attorney, prison, parliament, prince, baron, and duchess. Then we continue. Ask the question, is it because of the power of its speakers? So why Greek language? Because of Alexander the Great and Aristotle, we already talked about. Why did Latin become a common language throughout the Roman Empire? Is it because Rome was numerous than their colonies? No, it was asked ask the Roman legions. They have the power, military power. Wherever they go, the Latin language followed it, and they need to learn the Latin language if they want to do some career vision to work for the Roman Empire. And so always ask the legion of the Roman Empire. So this means that the rise of the language as the common language has something to do with the power of speakers. In other words, the Greek could become the Greek global language because of the military power of Alexander the Great, and the Latin could become a global language because of the power of the Roman military power. So this is the case that shows that is the power, that is the power of the speakers who can speak, that can make their language the global language. So I said that even after Roman declined, Latin remained as international language of education. So it's not only the English, but also the Arabic. So Arabic comes to spoken as widely across Northern Africa and Middle East, because these are the Arabic-speaking countries. So these are follow the spread of Islam. They have a religious power. So they carried along by the first of Moorish armies from the 8th century. As you know, the Moorish army is very scary and very brave, and they conquered many of this South Spain and Spanish occupation by Moors. And from Northern Africa, it began as early as 711. So this is described. They are very scary and brave people, and these are the description of how scary they are, the Spanish occupation by the Moors people. And also, the Moors is a Muslim inhabitant of Maghreb and the Iberian Peninsula, Sicily and Malta during the Middle Ages. The Moors were initially of Berber and Arab descent. How about the Spanish? Actually, Spanish army, and it was an answer to the fact that all the language has something to do with the power of its people. So why did the Spanish and Portuguese? And the Spanish is the mainstream language for most of the countries in Latin America. So they found their way into America, Africa, and Far East because this all because of their military power. Then they colonized them. Then they have the power. Then the language of the conquerors, the language of conquerors become the language of the people they subdued. So these are all putting all together. This shows the cases that the world common language has something to do with the power of the speakers. If you have the power, then your language also becomes the power. And also Spanish missions in America. The Spanish missions in Americas were Christian missions established by the Spanish Empire during the 15th and 19th centuries. At that time, it was in an area extending from Mexico, southwestern of the USA, and as far as Argentina and Chile. So the missionary and the Christianity has played a crucial role in spreading the English language, especially in the Latin America. In this regard, the Spanish stood at the forefront of spreading the gospel across Latin America. So, however, there is some question here in this history case. So the Celtic mystery, they say. So why Celtic leaves a little trace behind? As you see, imagine the Celtic people, they lived together with the Roman people. The Roman at the time, they were very civilized people. And you can imagine if the Celtic people have been peacefully lived under the control of the Roman culture, then you can imagine that how civilized their culture could have been. However, the Celtic leaves a very little trace. Of course, there is some traces. One of the Celtic languages is, one branch of Celtic language is Welsh. So where she's still living, and where she is still spoken by 20% of the people who are living in the Welsh area. But however, then imagine the Celtic used to be the original inhabitant of British Island, but after the Anglo-Saxon arrived at the British Island, the Celtic language has almost lost its traces, even though there are some traces left in certain parts of British Island. This is mystery. So Celtic lost the power battle with the newcomers, Anglo-Saxon. The language of the winner that the Anglo-Saxons spoke was the old language. So old language was born with the arrival of Anglo-Saxon people. And what about Celtic? Celtic declined. So the question is, did the newcomer use the power to remove Celtic language? Maybe that could be one possibility, but this is the mystery of Celtic disappearances. And Celtic people lived under Roman rules, the Celts. So they were people in Iron Age and medieval Europe who spoke a Celtic language, had these cultural similarities. So So the relationship between the ethnic group was a little bit different. So Latin is no longer used except for limited education. Greek is no longer used now. And so English has the same fate. This is the question you can ask. So Greek once ruled the linguistic world, but it declined. It is almost disappeared, even though it left some traces in English language. So Latin is no longer a mainstream language for anywhere, even though it traces a lot of traces, even though Latin has a lot of traces in English, but it is only used except for the education. So English is fated to follow the footsteps of this Latin and Greek. These are one of the major questions that we must consider. We are going to discuss in the later classes. So this is another question. Without strong power base, no language can make progress as an international medium of communication. So with this question in mind, let's continue to ask this question. Let's discuss some history case. Is it about power of its speakers? So it may take a militarily powerful nation to establish a language, but it takes an economically powerful one to maintain and expand it. This is what our textbook author David Christus said. So what does it mean? So this is the case of English. The military powerful nation established language, but that's not the whole story. That shouldn't stop here. We need something else. This is some economic power. So let's continue. Economy replaced military as a key driver of English spread. We will talk later. So actually it was 18th or 9th century. The Britain has risen as colonial power, and the British military power was the driver that spread the English around the world. But if you had stopped here, we have a question whether English language had continued its spread around the world. No. There is another new driver that replaced Britain's colonial power, and that proves to be even more stronger driver, that is economic power of America. So in 20th century, USA began to rise as a new economic power in the global society. So that proves very strong, and English happens to be their mainstream language. So how about, so now we will continue to ask another question, then how about word now? Any center or no center? Is there any driver, any new driver that can replace the American economic power? Is there any third driver that can continue to drive English, its move to maintain its position as a global language? So this is what happened in the 18th and 19th century. Wherever the Union Jack goes, so does English. This is the British Empire in 1900. So Australia and India was its colony. Australia was its colony, and it started with the British. It started after British government sent there the convicts, prisoners into Australian. And also, as you see, India was the gem of the crown that was the colony of British Empire, and Canada was also British colony, and also the African countries, they become the British colonies. So why English? Do you agree? English was at the right place at the right time. This is the topic sentence we will continue later in later classes here. Here are the points to ponder. So do you agree the fate of language depends on the power base of the speakers? So if so, why do you think so? If not, why do you not think so? So we will continue to talk about its related cases and stories. So this is another question. Next question, why English? Is it because of its number of speakers, numerically critical? So there should be many speakers as possible, so they make their language deserve to the global level. This is question is here. So we talked about George Weber, and he was surveyed which is the world's most popular languages. So he introduced some couple of factors, criteria to determine the most popular languages, and considering other factors such as economic power and the socio-literary prestige. So, as I said before, that in terms of the number of the speakers, Chinese and Indian, Hindu, may become the top language. However, when it comes to widespread around the global society, English tops the linguistic map. English tops the language. Why? Because, and also he also considered other factors, economic power, social literary prestige, and other factors. Then his conclusion was English is the world's most popular language, followed by French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, Chinese, and German. So let's continue with our case or stories so that we can see why English deserves a global position. So this is an interesting case about Norman conquest, but no linguistic conquest. So as you know, if it is the power of speakers, if that is entirely true, then Norman conquest should lead to the linguistic conquest. But it didn't turn out that way. And even though there was a military conquest, but there was no linguistic conquest. This is another case that contradicts our perception that the language is the global language is a matter of the power of its speakers is here. At first, that when William that arrived at British Island, he became the king of the British Island. Then the British society was divided into two groups. One is the French language for the upper class, and English for low-life English for churches or sermon. So it was for about 100 years that this continued. French became a people of nobility, but now in the power scale tips in favor of English grassroots. There are some reasons. First reason is the Norman nobility, Norman rulers, they lost their assets, they lost their houses, they lost their lands left in the Norman lands, in the French land. So they lost all the fortunes. Most of their fortunes left their homeland in France. So they couldn't no longer lead a double life. The double life means they used to spend half of their life in the France, and they used to live half of life in Britain because they have houses and lands in France. But now they lost most of their fortune in France, though they have few power without that. So their power began to decline. And also, English rose at being high, meanwhile, as a main communication medium in not only in social, academic, and political life. And there is some emergence of national bond, national pride about their language. But there is a question is here. What if the Normans had taken up residence in larger numbers? As I said, the Norman, when they arrived at the Britain Island, that he brought with him only 5,000 soldiers. So they arrived there, and if they're young French soldiers, maybe many of them married with the British wife, and they had them children, and the children may have been perfectly bilingual. So when they are talking to the bonjour, and when they're speaking to their mom, they're good morning, mom, then they bilingual. So, what if they had, but the number was minority. Number was minor. The French number, the number of French residents was minor. So maybe that could be major reason. One of the major reasons that the French, the Norman, their language couldn't become a mainstream language of British society. If the French people have managed to replace the English with the French language, maybe today we are learning French language as a lingua franca, but that didn't happen. Maybe numerical reason may be the reason. So English, and also another reason is English has been already established so well as since the Anglo-Saxon time. So when I'm talking about the language was established, there should be a balance between oral language and the written language. In the Anglo-Saxon time, English has established not only the oral language but also the written language. There was a great epic like Beowulf, and there was many written languages because the Anglo-Saxon people, they studied Latin and they studied the language. So there were many missionaries from the Roman Empire, and they studied Latin, and they also studied their own Old English language. So there is a written records of Old English and the speaking record of English, and that is the power. A real power language that comes from not only from the oral but from the written language. Maybe we should thank for our Sejong Daewang and the great emperor of our Joseon dynasty, because he invented, the great king of Sejong invented the Korean alphabet. So that's why we could live with our written Korean language. So therefore, this is the value of the written alphabet. This is very important. So Anglo-Saxon time, the Old English, they have already solid ground, not only as speaking, but also for the writing language. And also the outcome might have been different. So there are three reasons. The French people, they were numerically insignificant. They were numerically small. And second one was the French nobility, they lost their fortune in France. So their political power has been weakened. And third was Old Anglo-Saxon. They already established their Old English as strong as a oral and a spoken language. So there is another interesting case. Is it about the number of speakers? Why English was adopted as the language of USA? So this is an interesting case because at that time, America was a melting pot. There was, in the early settlement period, in the colonists, well, they came from all the different parts of the Europe, Irish, Scot, and German, and Jewish, and Dutch people, Spanish people, French people, German people, all the different European background. Then why? There was Dutch, Spanish, French, all the different languages. It was a melting pot. Then why it happens to be English. So as you know, Dutch in New Amsterdam, they used to occupy New York before 1664. So they left their language, Dutch languages, Harlem, Brooklyn, cookie, stoop, and waffle. These are the Dutch languages that they came into. They found this way in England. And German effects in Pennsylvania, so Indiana, Montana, and Dakota. This is German effects in English. And French impact in northern area, New Orleans, and Spanish in the west. Spanish, they used to occupy much of it in the west. So they have their words that found its way into English: carnival, canoe, hammock, and barbecue, and juice. So all the different tongues were competing against English in 1800. So this is interesting. So all the different languages were competing against English. So that means the very variety of immigrant tongues actually have helped establish English as a language. So what does it mean? If English has a very one single rival language, for example, Dutch, then the competition would be very tough between English and Dutch. Which language could be the mainstream language? Maybe the early colonists had to choose to be a bilingualist like Canada. Let's take Dutch and English as the official languages. Maybe they could have chosen the Spanish language as the second language, but they never happened. Why? Because imagine there was a single rival language to English, then how could it have been different? It could have been different. Maybe the USA may have chosen to be bilingual between the French or Spanish. Could be their secondary language here. However, that didn't happen. Why? So one of the answers could be found is here. It was 1800, and it was for the first time the census in America. And there was a numerical imbalance. Here, 10-to-1 share. What does it mean? 10 to. So at that time, the America in 1880, the America was dislodged. So it was controlled by Louisiana, France, and America used to be just 1/3 of what is now. So at that time, they made a census, and they found out there was 10-to-1. What does it mean? 10-to-1 share. So this means that by that time, when the first census took place, there were more than 2 million people of English and Welsh extraction recorded in 16 states. And the total of other principal language speakers like German, Dutch, and French, in the order of their numerical significance, hardly exceeded 200,000. So this is what I'm saying, the 10-to-1. 10 for English-speaking colonists in 1800, and 1 is the combined total of other major languages like German, Dutch, and French, so 10-to-1. So you may argue that 10-to-1 is, but it's too small, it's only 2 million, but now in American population, 300 million, so it's too long a time, so it doesn't make sense, one might argue. However, but curiously enough, it was always the ratio of 10-to-1 between English speakers and non-English speakers. That's interesting, 10-to-1. So that's why that the USA have always calmed down any argument to adopt let's adopt another Spanish language or French language as a second language. Have been no argument about the language. So there has been no argument in American linguistic history to adopt another language as a secondary language. This is interesting.